Hey world history students, hopefully this will be the last video of period 4. It's quite of period 2. It's going to be a doozy as we're going over 4.4 to 4.7 in a matter of a bit of time. So I'll try to have a few videos to show you, but for the most part I'm going to try to breeze through a lot of this content. So we're going to start with, oh, here it is. Oh man, I'm messing this up. It's right here. Okay, I gotta look right here. So maritime empires and economic systems. So can't wait to talk about economics because that's fun for me. So you've been properly warned. So first, let's talk about the Portuguese. So biggest thing about them is they were one of the first to emerge closest to the Mediterranean and out to the Atlantic Sea, or closest to the Atlantic Sea, ocean. Good job. And so what they go on to do is start exploring the coast of Africa, like we've already talked about, and eventually set up what were called trading post empires. This started under Prince Henry the Navigator, like we mentioned, started a school for navigation, explored Africa, the coastline, went all the way around. Now, landing in Calicut in India, they take over ports and then they can control and tax the trade. They had what's called a cartaz, which it was a document that permitted trade in the Indian Ocean, that if you did not have one, you'd either pay taxes, forfeit your cargo, or be considered an enemy. The main risk was being sunk by Portuguese vessels. Because keep in mind, before the Portuguese show up, the Indian Ocean trade didn't have any state control. It was free exercise and free enterprise of business interests of transportation. So there were no weapons on any of these boats. Yes, there was piracy, and ways to avoid it with like small arms or maybe even muskets and stuff, but it wasn't like it was today or what we later will see. And all boats didn't have cannon on them until the Portuguese showed up. This became a large source of income for the Portuguese, just having this tax. So that was one of their major ways of gaining money, along, as you see this, Estado Português de Índia, which is basically a map of all of the places they had trading relationships in the very beginning. Next up, though, they go on accidentally. Cabral hits the coastline of Brazil, discovers parts of that, and they develop sugar cultivation, which creates huge profits, and then later eventually coffee. Now keep in mind, right here on my mouse, that little spot there in the Azores and Canaries, they were the first places to have sugar cultivation. And immediately they became the major exporters of sugar for almost all of Europe. And these small islands were all it had. So once they found climate that was much more suitable, they were able to create a sugar boom where almost everybody has it. I mean, look at today. Look how cheap table sugar is. It's still a market. It's still a needed good that is cultivated. Navies, however, were difficult to keep up with production due to death and disease. So a lot of these going on boats and long voyages, you might have 1/3 of your sailors die during a long voyage. Not to mention it was expensive to outfit a boat for several months of goods that could store. No refrigeration, lots of rats, all kinds of things that could possibly go wrong. And so those became increased concerns. Now, because of this and because of disease, they couldn't get as much population, particularly in Brazil. So they then turned to Africa for slaves, mainly because the Africans were suitable to that climate. I mean, I say suitable, they're used to it. That doesn't mean like bred any differently, but they are used to these warm and tropical climates, and they were resistant to European diseases because they've always had contact. So they turned to the African coastal kingdoms, who then provide slaves via trade. The kingdoms would participate mainly to protect their own people and gain their own wealth. So while there's these things that say, well, Africans participate in the slave trade too. Yes, but usually under duress or gunpoint, or with the understanding that if they didn't provide slaves, they would be taking slaves. In fact, one of the letters from Alfonso II to the King of Portugal was, please stop stealing our men, we'll provide you with people, but please stop stealing our subjects. And so what this encouraged then was further conflict to go into the interior to fight and capture more and more tribes for the slave trade. Almost 5 million Africans go to Brazil. And even with the natural increase, population died about 5% annually. While even what becomes of the United States, that 5% was roughly still the same rate, there was a high enough reproduction rate in the 13 colonies in the east coast of the Americas that the population of slaves actually kept increasing despite those losses. Brazil was the last Latin American country to outlaw slavery. Cuba was still a colony of Spain in 1888, but Brazil is going to be the last country to formally abolish slavery. So that's Portugal in a nutshell. So the next are the Spanish. They began colonization with the Canary Islands in the 1440s, learned lessons in governance and administration from their homeland, and they were united after what was called the Reconquista in 1492. Because of that, they expelled Jews and Muslims out of the Iberian Peninsula and were then able to focus outwardly. Losing to Portugal in some conflicts, they looked elsewhere, rather than going to Africa to get to India. So Columbus, he uses a map of the world that's smaller and overestimated the size of both Europe and underestimated the size of the world. Most people thought he was wrong. This wasn't the typical everyone thought the world was flat kind of stuff. It was, he's nuts, don't listen to him. They give him 3 ships. One was Nina, was used and manned by the owners that were going against their will. So this was not a popular everyone on board for wealth and riches. This was, let's listen to this guy, maybe he'll go away. He discovers the islands. Of course, there's people living there in the Bahamas in the second week of October 1492. He left 39 men in Hispaniola as a fort, which would be found destroyed and seemingly attacked when they returned to it later. He was autocratic, religiously zealous to the point of fault, and wanted wealth and riches for his contribution to the Spanish crown. Here's one example. One man caught stealing corn, had his nose and ears cut off, was placed in shackles, and then was auctioned off as a slave. A woman who dared to suggest that Columbus was of lowly birth was punished by his brother Bartolome, who had also traveled to the Caribbean. She was stripped naked and paraded around the colony on the back of a mule. This is during his governorship, by the way. Bartolome ordered that her tongue be cut out, said one witness, and Christopher congratulated him for defending the family. Now, Columbus was then recalled in his 3rd voyage back to Spain, and here's one of his entries. It is now 17 years since I came to serve these princes with the enterprise of the Indies. They made me pass 8 of them in discussion, and at the end, rejected it as a thing of jest. Nevertheless, I persisted therein. Over there I have placed under the sovereignty more than there is in Africa and Europe, and more than 1,700 islands. In 7 years, I, by the divine will, made that conquest at a time when I was entitled to expect rewards and retirement. I was incontinently arrested and sent home loaded with chains. The accusation was brought out of malice on the basis of charges made by civilians who had revolted and wished to take possession of the land. I beg your graces, with the zeal of faithful Christians in whom their highness have confidence, to read all my papers and to consider how I, who came from so far to serve these princes, now at the end of my days have been despoiled of my honor and my property without cause, wherein is neither justice nor mercy. He died believing, though, he had found Asia. Now, the other big part here is New Spain. The biggest part of New Spain is that it brought in some wealth from the Spanish, but not until the conquest of almost all the Americas, particularly the Mexica, which is the Aztecs, and the Inca. So here you see the map in 1513, as you see the ones underneath SP, and then further on expansion and going on. There's a video you can see if you really want. Okay, so the big deal here is Potosi. This here is the city of Potosi. It's a mountain that has probably one of the richest silver deposits in the New World. And because of this, The Spanish were more concerned with getting silver out of there to spend as best as they can. So slave conditions, horrible living conditions, not caring about the people. If they died, that kind of thing. There's one quote that's, "You could build a silver bridge from Potosi to Madrid from what was mined here, and one back with the bones of those that died taking it out." Now, from there, if you remember that map from the Portuguese, looking back, all right, it shows Manila and Acapulco. So that was the galleons. The Spanish galleons would eventually have a mint in Acapulco that could certify Spanish coin and then go across the Pacific Ocean. Now, we think of these times where these voyages, people just make them and, boating is boating and whatever. These are still horrible times. Ships could still have disease and pestilence that could wipe out the entire boat. They could run out of supplies. They could go hungry. There's all kinds of dangers that could happen, not to mention, typhoons. So sailing in these days, most ships were okay, but there's definitely possibilities of things going on. And in fact, like, for example, the story Moby Dick has a basic in history. And there was a whaling vessel that came into contact with a sperm whale that rammed the boat. And in the process, some of the firsthand accounts of the people that actually survived said this sailing boat, you gotta think of the size of it, went backwards. It stopped forward motion. And what that actually helped do is dismast the ship and did some structural damage to it. It actually sank the boat. So there's all kinds of dangerous conditions out here. So here's one. This was an explanation of taking the trip from Acapulco to Manila. "There is hunger, thirst, sickness, cold, continual watching, and other sufferings. The sailor endured all the plagues God sent upon Pharaoh to soften his heart. The ship swarms with little vermin. The Spaniards called gojos, bread in the biscuit. If Moses miraculously converted his rod into a serpent, aboard the galleon of a piece of flesh, without any miracles, converted into wood and in the shape of a serpent." So they bring silver from Mexico and Peru to either Spain for minting and then to China, or directly to Asia via the Philippines. Manila becomes a major trade hub from that. An entrepot, ENTREPOT. And it's basically like a depot as a city, or a place of dropping goods and moving on. The influx of more silver will wreck, of course, the Ming Dynasty, as inflation will ruin its ability to collect enough taxes. So for comparison, the gold to silver ratio of how much 1 ounce of gold would get in ounces of silver was double what it was double in Spain what it was in China. What that means is, if you had a bar of gold in Spain and you'd exchange it, you get 20 silver pieces. You then go to China, give them 20 silver pieces, and get 2 bars of gold. Because the Chinese valued the amount of gold or amount of silver and kept the price regardless of what the market was doing. And because of that artificially high price of silver, they hoarded a lot of it, and it really didn't help them, as it eventually bankrupted them in a sense. It ruined their economy because the actual price of silver was a lot less, and yet they kept it high. And so who benefited? Japan sold silver to the Chinese via European traders for Chinese goods. So the Japanese were mining silver too, as well. Spain, their new amounts of silver gave them access to Asian markets with a commodity that they would easily accept. So it was very easy then to take the Spanish pieces of 8 and put them into Chinese coin. And the Portuguese became trading middlemen between China and Japan. So all of them benefited at the expense of China. Now the Spanish Armada we've kind of talked about a little bit. A major fleet, or several fleets, sails quick around the British Isles. Much of their force was lost or destroyed due to storms and frequent quick attacks by English boats. England decided never to engage close by, but hit them by cannon and from distance. Spain's larger ships were designed mainly for peppering the enemy and then boarding them and taking over the boat. The fleet retreats to Spain. England does its own stuff back and still fails. One other side note, remember how I told you the Habsburgs and all of that, and look up the Habsburg chin. So here's, I believe, Charles V on the left, and his son will be Philip II. I could be totally wrong and the other way around, but that's the Habsburg line, particularly what they call the Habsburg chin. Getting a little bit pronounced because, of course, the family tree isn't really that far branching out, because royalty can only marry more royalty, and so their kids went out and had kids and then married again kids. And so here's one joke about the Spanish Habsburgs too, because gotta love that chin. Sorry. All right. Anyway, one other to mention is this is a picture called Las Castas, and this is the República de Indios. And for the most part, the Spanish would allow the natives to find some ways of autonomy within their own tribes. However, this is a picture of all the different various cultural and ethnic mixing that happened, and pretty much what parentage meant to the child in political or social status. And it's still being challenged today as whether or not this was really accurate or how accurate it was. But there is some truth to this about what this was. So we'll get into it more in a little bit. So lastly, the Jesuits, sorry about the Spanish. Like I talked about them, St. Ignatius Loyola was dissatisfied with monastic orders of Catholics, appeals directly to Pope, and creates the Society of Jesus. All right, next up, the Dutch. They gained independence from Spain in the late 16th century due to some revolts. They fortified their towns with moats, walls, fortifications, and designed during the age of gunpowder. So they were actually very well comprised defense forts within Europe. So when they revolted, they knew what they were doing in terms of defense. In the 17th century was the Dutch Golden Age, stuff you've read about already. They had the largest merchant fleet in the world by that point. They had a boat called the Vloot. It was designed only for transportation and trade, not for repurpose as a warship like most other designs. What most of the other ship designs were is a vessel for trade and long distance, but at the same point, it was also for repurposing and being able to put a large amounts of guns. By doing that, it decreases its efficiency and carrying capacity. And the Vloot were designed to be a little bit faster so they could outrun big ships, but also have a few guns to pepper the enemy. But get away is more important. And it required less people as well as less weaponry. They become the most developed nation in the world. So in the 1600s, if you were to live somewhere, the Dutch would be one of the places to be. The Netherlands, rather. And this becomes, because everybody could invest in these joint stock companies, a lot of people, there's a developing middle class and people were making some wealth. So you get pictures like this one right here, which is Vermeer's View of Dreft, and then other paintings, particularly like Rembrandt, which you may have heard of or not. The Dutch East India Company was the company that brought the Netherlands its wealth. They acted as the Dutch nation in Asia. So it was the representative of the Dutch nation, but it wasn't the Dutch government. It was a company. It was a corporation. It was joint stock, so you could put money in a collective pot, which funded expenditures for the company, and it brought in profits based on investment. Because of this funding and limited losses, they were able to beat the Portuguese out of many of the Indian and Asian trading ports, as you see here. They were extremely hostile to competing merchants of other nations and actually engaged in their own wars to stop trade from other nations.
There are only two things I can't stand in this world. People who are intolerant of other people's cultures, and the Dutch.
What? To give you an understanding of how wealthy the Dutch East India Trading Company became, at its heyday, adjusted for about $8 trillion, which is the combined wealth of the top of 20 modern companies that you see here. Now, those companies have changed in value a little bit because I think it's a little bit older, but we got Apple, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, Facebook. Alibaba is a search and distribution like an Amazon for China and Asian markets. All the other ones, you pretty much can get an idea about. So, they did have few settlement colonies, particularly the New Netherlands down here in what's New Batavia, which are the Java and Sumatra Islands, and parts of South Africa. So here's also a Japanese rendition of the Dutch and their capabilities and what they look like. And these were what they called the black ships and stuff. So, all right, next up are the French. All right, so French. Colonial empire with few settlements, lost over time because of their competition and wars with both the British and the Dutch. They had a trading empire in Canada, Louisiana, and a few ports in India. Their first thing, Louis XIV, this dude here, dead center. Of course, there's probably a lot of memes if you look him up. Gotta love that hair down the middle. He reigned from 1643 to 1715, one of the longest lasting monarchs. Over 72 years he was in power. Yep, I did my math right. He builds Versailles, which is this palatial estate that you're seeing several pictures of. He had guest accommodations for most of the French nobility. He figured that having them close to him prevented them from scheming against him in their own territory. He tied French law and justice system to him, and that he had final say in all things. So this is what we call an absolute monarch. Yeah, sure, they could have some kind of governing bodies in a republic or whatever, some legislature or nobles or whatever. But all said and done, it was his and his control. He wanted to expand France through a series of wars, which will financially wreck France over time. They will not be able to ever pay back these debts incurred. And here you see over here the map of France. Way over there. Those are the expansions under Henry XIV and 15th, leading up into the French Revolution. And that's one of the major reasons why the revolution occurs, is the amount of debts brought forth by Louis XIV. So Voltaire, during the age of Louis XIV, said, "It is dangerous to be right in matters on which the established authorities are wrong." Political satire is kind of funny if you can handle the humor and stuff. But anyway, this was an immense centralized power in France. And because of this is it's almost like what we'd call a dictator today. And his focus on expanding France in the mainland hurt his ability to further conquer elsewhere. Particularly, much of his possessions in French Canada and Louisiana are really just trading ports with no long-term established cities, as you can see there, except for like Montreal and Quebec. So the last bit is, towards the end of this time period, this got a lot of people, particularly in France and England, thinking about new political ideas and social theory, about what are our notions of rights, who's in charge, and who has those rights. So, France in a nutshell. Next up, England. And there's surprisingly a lot of English notes and information we go over. Why? Because we speak English and this is going to affect us. So let's go over a lot really quickly, because some of this might actually show up in the SOL test too. So English Civil War happened between 1640s and 1660, where Charles I, this guy right here, he suspends Parliament for making laws without parliamentary consent, meaning he's the king. He's looking over across the channel and saying, whoa, Louis gets to do all this. I get to do it too. I'm the king. So he starts making rules without Parliament. And that's not with like the Magna Carta and all this other stuff in English law. That's not how it was done. So that sets everybody off. By setting them off, I mean, it starts with a civil war. And eventually Charles's forces, the Royalists, where the Cavaliers eventually lose. Charles is executed, and his son is sent out to exile in, of all places, France. So Oliver Cromwell rules as protector from 1651 to 1658. For the future, Cromwell did a lot of bad things to the Irish, because once again, the Irish are not Catholic, so therefore they're able to be made fun of, treated like garbage, stole their stuff. I mean, pretty bad, because after all, they're just Irish. And that's kind of how most people viewed them, so it's pretty bad. Anyway, royalists and parliamentarians, you're seeing the conflict over the Civil War here in terms of the phases of the war. This was a mean back and forth, Roundhead versus Cavaliers, basically making jokes of go after each other, so this is what the Civil War looked like. There was printing and all that kind of stuff. So Cromwell dies. Then they put in Charles II, who restores the monarchy, pardons everyone involved in the Civil War, unless you killed his dad. If you were part of the decision to kill his dad, you were hunted down and tried and killed for death. Cromwell was exhumed and split into 4 pieces, and his 4 pieces were put in the Tower of London. So, side note, if you ever do anything bad, don't do anything really, really bad to England, because they don't have like rules of how awful they're going to be at you. So just FYI, just write that down for the future. So after some more issues, Charles II tries to be like, I'm in charge now and I'm going to make rules. And Parliament's like, dude, did you not learn it? Did your dad not teach you anything? Like, you don't want to do this. And once again, it's causing another problem. Charles II dies and his brother James comes to power. James II is a Catholic, and he converted to Catholicism when he was in exile in France, which creates another major problem, because once again, England is now Protestant. He tries to rule without any parliamentary agreement, and he even starts persecuting some non-Catholics. So he's already off to a good start. He has a son, and the English crown starts to worry about having a Catholic dynasty. And James is ignoring of his sister Mary for succession to the throne. So, more conflict. Parliament petitions Mary's husband. Now, Mary, you actually know who Mary's husband is, because if you're in Virginia, you know at least one school that has the word Mary alone in it. It's not Mary Washington. If you really did that, we're talking older. What we're talking here is she had a husband named William of Orange, who's from the Netherlands. They invite him to come in and take over England. They literally say, hey, can you bring an army over here and like topple this dude? So he does. And it was relatively painless. Like it was a war, but it wasn't too bad. It was particularly bad because all of the Jacobins, or the James supporters, fled to Ireland, where the Irish were hoping to rise in revolt for the Catholic king, and William shows up and opens a can of whoop on them and defeats the Irish and Jacobin side, then causes a lot more hardship and destruction in Ireland as a payment for their support of the Catholic king. The English then have a joint stock company to eventually control Indian trade for the English. The English Navy eventually, by the end, will establish a supremacy over the seas after they defeat first Spanish, then some of the French, and then the Dutch. And there were 3 Anglo-Dutch wars. In the first one, the English and Dutch were basically whatever. The second one, the Dutch actually had a few up-ins on the English, but the third was catastrophic for the Dutch. And after the series of 3 there, they stopped and basically let things go for a bit. The 30 Years of War. So wars, pirates, effects of maritime empires. 30 Years War. So these are the cool looking outfits these guys had. Keep in mind, those guns were probably 20 to 30 pounds. They didn't have steel like they used to. They didn't have steel like we do now. So making steel was very difficult. So it was usually a higher concentration of iron and very heavy. So you had to fire it with a stand. Otherwise, it wasn't going to be effective. And you actually see how they're lifting it. It's the projectile of the ball. It was powerful, but it wasn't like like modern weapons again, the amount of powder expended, all that stuff. So, some of the catastrophic damage done, both sides conquering Protestants versus Catholics, would take over towns and commit horrendous atrocities. And so some of these were actually depicted in painting. For the very first time, we're seeing actual depictions of awful, awful things that are done to people. And so this one dude was like a traveling painter who would look around and be like, here's some pretty awful stuff. I'm going to paint that. I don't know why, but that was like a way to show it. Which brings us to one example of one firsthand account he had. During the 30 Years' War, when taking towns and what the armies would do to some of the population, a man hangs upside down in a fire. Others are stabbed to death or tortured. Their women folk offer values to save their lives or try to flee. Elsewhere, women are assaulted and violated. In another image, the branches of a tree are weighed down with hanging bodies, and a religious symbol is proffered to a victim as the last thing he will see on earth. The caption describes the hanged men as unhappy fruit. Europe in the mid-17th century, at the height of the 30 Years' War. The artist who recorded these horrors was Jacques Collot, who saw the French army invade and occupy Lorraine in 1633. He was perhaps the closest thing we had at the time to a photojournalist. So it began as a war of religious uprisings in Germany, which was at the time called the Holy Roman Empire, and with states getting involved to protect both Protestants and Catholics. So here's a fun one. This is literally called the defenestration of Prague. And the origin of the word derives from the Prague defenestration in 1618, when the disgruntled Protestant estates threw out two royal governors from the window and wrote an extensive apologia to this act. However, in the Middle Ages and early modern times, defenestrations took place quite often, and this event carried elements of lynch, ordeal, and murder committed together. In medieval and early modern society, which is markedly horizontally divided, the importance of the layers decreasing from top to bottom, defenestration has the character of a symbolic punishment by toppling down the executors, show that the overthrow in their defined class behaved improperly. So basically, you have someone really high up and you throw them out of window, means they're back to all the way down. And so this disgruntled problem was a response to these religious leaders trying to exert their rule. When France saw that Austria was gaining too much influential power in this conflict, where do I have it? Okay, so Austrian Habsburgs, they were getting too much power here. And because of that, France declares war on Austria. Now, get this. The French Catholic nation declaring war on a Catholic nation over a war that began about Protestants and Catholics. Denmark declares war on Sweden to curb Swedish powers. Both of them are Protestant. Two Lutheran nations, like the same Lutheran, are declaring one another. So what happens is, instead of this being a war of just political issues, it turns into, so here's your spread of Catholic and Protestant and other groups. Instead of this being just a war of ideologies, who's right and who's wrong, it turns into a balance of power struggle over who has control of these areas and who can be allowed to. At the end of it, there's 1/3 of all Germans died of disease, war, famine, and army conquest. So here's more than 2/3. And the reds are the major transportation links, thoroughfares. So you can see, if you were along the way of the army, you were in danger of awful things happening to you. Pandemic as well. So also the amount of food produced and taken from these places. At the Treaty of Westphalia, which I'll show you a little video in a second, Spain acknowledges Netherlands as independent. France gives Alsace, or gains the Alsace province, which is over here, which we'll come back to even more issue later in the 1870s. Calvinism is recognized as an appropriate religion, mainly around Switzerland, but it becomes okay for everybody. The right to practice religion, even if not the main religion of the principality. So everyone can practice their faith now. And Switzerland is finally given its independence, recognized.
So, we're agreed. France gets the city of Pinerolo and the bishopric of Metz, and to Sweden goes Western Pomerania, Wismar, Stettin, and the islands of Rügen and Pearl.
Oh, lovely.
And England, for applying within 28 days, gets this charming carriage clock.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm very kind.
All right, well, I think that concludes our treaty. Gentlemen, a toast. Peace in Europe.
Peace in Europe.
Excellent.
Excuse me.
Oh, what is it now? Why are you interrupting?
Forgive me, Ambassador, but what about Luxembourg?
He's right. Nobody owns Luxembourg.
France, I thought you owned Luxembourg.
No, we thought it was Dutch.
Sweden?
No, we thought it was Belgium.
England?
Well, we just knew it was on the continent and didn't give a toss, really.
It looks as if Luxembourg has slipped through our net, doesn't it? Well, we've got a country going up for grabs. Anybody interested?
Is it Protestant?
Mostly Catholic, I believe.
Let's just use it for storage.
Oh, yeah, good. No, that's good. 'Cause
No,
all
it's
right.
not good. Someone's got to take it. Come on, who wants it? What's it consist of?
The small state of Luxembourg is a charming reminder of how Europe used to be. Plague victims crawl elegantly down its dung-filled streets, greasing the way with pus from their buboes, while at least 2 children a week are burned as the devil in the handsome market square. The town boasts 2 taverns, one humorous dwarf, and a shop that sells little things made of straw.
Yeah, sounds like Stevenage.
Well, who wants it then?
Well, we don't want it. We've already got to do up West Pomerania, not to mention Wismar and Stettin.
France has no need of Luxembourg, although I do quite like the sound of that shop selling little things made out of straw.
Yes, that shop is an economic bonus, isn't it? All right, I'll take it.
Good, excellent. So, Luxembourg goes to Sweden.
No, hold on. You can't just give Sweden another province.
But you didn't want it.
Well, yeah, but that means that they've now got Western Pomerania, Stettin, and Luxembourg. That's not fair.
We need Luxembourg to store our pickled herring.
Why can't you store them in Sweden?
Oh, the whiff.
You Swedes and your pickled herring. Why can't you eat a proper fish?
What's wrong with pickled herring?
Nothing if you're Swedish.
No, gentlemen, please.
What is that supposed to mean?
No, well, come on. Just because we all hate the Germans doesn't mean we have to like the Swedes.
The Swedes are all right.
Well, they hate you.
No, we don't.
We don't hate anybody. Well, you should. It makes life more fun.
Look, all we wanted to do was protect the Protestant princes.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Why,
really.
you didn't fancy just kicking some German arse? That's why we were there.
That's what rather appealed to us, too.
Gentlemen, please, let's not unravel the tapestry of this treaty ere the shuttle has crossed the loom.
What?
Let's not cock it out now. We're so close. I have a proposal. Why not split Luxembourg in 2? Sweden can get the east and France the west.
Excellent.
No, that's good. That's good.
Sorry.
Oh, what do you
Sorry.
want now?
Forgive me, Ambassador, but is it truly wise to divide a land in so wild and ragged a fashion? In future years, there will be Swedish Luxembourgers and French Luxembourgers, Protestant and Catholic, both at each other's throats.
Oh, well, I don't know. I think that'll give journalists of the future something to write about. No, I'm satisfied with this. I think this is good. I think in the future all our petty squabbles over Europe will be forgotten. It'll just be one huge state, probably with a single currency. Oh, hurrah! Yes, that's a nice thought.
It is.
I'm going to have to opt out over that one, I'm afraid. We're more interested in our new colony in America.
Yes, America has given us nothing but tobacco and potatoes and that new high-grade narcotic that you're so fond of. No, gentlemen, I think on the crucible of war we have forged a new Europe. Right, so who's for
Pint.
Half litre?
Lager?
Bitter.
Finest claret?
Oh, I'd love a pickled herring.
Swedes and your pickled herring, honestly. Well, it's getting...
Forgive me.
Oh, she's back. What now?
Forgive me, Ambassador, but there is one more task. The savage land of the Balkans.
Coitus. We forgot the Balkans. Well, look, here we are. 1, 2, 3 there. Look, Bosnia, Herzegovina, Kosovo, Greater Serbia. Everyone satisfied?
Well, whatever.
I think, gentlemen, we have guaranteed the peace and freedom of Europe for forever.
May I say, Ambassador, that with this historic redrafting of the European borders, you are really spoiling us. These, on the other hand, are revolting.
And so, with lightened hearts but heavy irony, the treaty was signed.
Piracy becomes another major issue. They traded on valuable treasure ships. They mainly on the Spanish. The golden age was like 1660 to 1720. So we're not talking as much of a long era. There's hour and all that. I mean, keep in mind, there were no more than 4,000 pirates any given time. Most merchant ships of this time housed 200 to 300 men. So we're talking about you have 20 merchant ships and you already have as many pirates as there are on the seas. So it wasn't really like this major thing. Not to mention the amount of money and setup to have the ammunition and cannon that they did. They didn't share a match. And like, yeah, I know. Well, I played, oh my goodness, what am I talking about? Assassin's Creed 4. And I mean, I was blowing up all kinds of boats. That's never how it happened. The size of your guns mattered by how many decks your boat had. And there's no way pirate vessels could handle a 2-decker. So it's not to shake all of your stuff there. The pirates' ports were mainly of Port Royal, Jamaica, Tortuga, Haiti, and Nassau, Bahamas. Port Royal, however, was completely destroyed by a tsunami in the Caribbean. So that's why you're seeing these underwater archaeology monuments. Okay, effects of maritime empires. So what's going on? Okay,